Hey guys, Brandon Prepper 2K here. Today we're going to look at a 2003 SV650 Suzuki motorcycle that has a seized rear master cylinder, and I'm going to go through how to unseize that and how to rebuild the master cylinder. Basically, what you will notice if you have this problem is you will go to use your brake, and the brake pedal, I don't know if you can see this, move the camera down a little bit, your brake pedal right here will go all the way down to the bottom, and you don't have any brakes. So most of us don't use our rear brakes all that often, but we still want them to work. So when they stop working, it gets a little bit sketchy, even if you don't use it a lot. So what we're going to do today is disassemble the rear master cylinder and figure out what's wrong with it. I actually already know what's wrong with the rear master cylinder. It is the piston that goes inside of the master cylinder itself is seized, and so we're going to have to unseize that. It's basically a $40 job if you do it yourself versus a $200 job if you take it to the dealership. So what you'll notice is right here is the rear brake reservoir, and there's a hose that I've already disconnected that goes underneath that rear cylinder reservoir, and you're going to want to disconnect that. And once you disconnect that, there's two screws here. You unscrew those with an Allen wrench, and your master cylinder will come off of the bike. There's also another hose right here that connects to the bottom of the master cylinder, the side of it, in a little bit. But basically, this is really easy to disassemble. And what's important is that you get to this part. Right there. That is the rear master cylinder, and I've got it soaking in a tray of brake fluid right now, and there's the related parts that came off of it during the disassembly. It's really easy to get to this phase, so I don't need to really go through that in too much detail. If you can't take the rear master cylinder off the bike, you might have to just take it to the shop and have them do it. It's really not that difficult. So the next step is for us to unseize. There's a piston that runs up inside of this. You can see it kind of stuck in there. And until we can get that out, our rear brakes are not going to work. So the next step will be to unseize that. And there's another YouTube video on how to do this, but it didn't go into as much detail as I plan on doing. Because we're dealing with brake fluid, which is flammable, I've got a little fire extinguisher here, and we're going to try and be safe, although I do have a beverage. So before we get too drunk, we're going to get this unseized and rebuilt. Typically this happens because we don't use our rear brake that often, and so it's going to seize up from lack of use. Okay, so once you have your master cylinder out and you've confirmed that it's seized, which it's very easy to tell, the plunger is going to be jammed all the way in the back here. And you can hammer on this if you want to, but you're just going to damage this part. And last time I looked, just this body right here was over $100 to replace. So yeah, we don't want to bugger that up. So what we're going to do is use some heat to try and vaporize the brake fluid that is underneath this cylinder, and hopefully, if we're lucky, it'll pop it out. So what we're going to use for that is got a little propane torch here. Very inexpensive. I think I paid like 15 bucks maybe for the nozzle here, and you can get these cans. Sure, you're familiar, $4 for like a 2-pack of them at Walmart, very cheap. Then we're going to use a pair of vice grips to clamp onto this, and we're just simply going to attach it. Well, not really attach it so much, but basically just balance it on that 2x4. So that way, when we heat it up, we don't have to touch it Again, safety is important, so we got our little fire extinguisher here in case anything goes horrifically wrong. And I'm going to move this oil pan that has brake fluid. I don't have to worry about that. So basically what we're going to do is just start heating this up around, and hopefully that piston will just pop out. Alright, so I drained the brake fluid out of this pan that was in here. I had this part soaking in brake fluid for about a week. Obviously that's overkill. It took me a while to get the new parts in that I'm going to use to rebuild this master cylinder with, and while I was waiting for those parts to come in, I had this soaking in this little barbecue pan, just because I figured if I could get more brake fluid soaked in here, it's going to be easier to get this piston out of here. So here we go. Wish me luck. Let's see if this works. There we go. These things are kind of finicky sometimes. Alright, so I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if this is going to just pop out of here. Oh, and then my torch goes out. Starting to smoke a little bit. You want to be careful because if this thing pops out, you don't want it to pop you in the head. And there it goes. I hope you caught that. It just totally popped out. That, my friends, is how you unseize a totally seized master cylinder on a motorcycle. So I'm going to let these parts cool off for a minute, and then we will rebuild this sucker and get my bike back on the road with a functional rear brake. So as you may have noticed, I'm not sure if the camera caught it last time, but there were only 2 parts that came out, and they've cooled off sufficiently now, I think. They were really hot. They were smoking hot. The brake fluid that I had inside of the cylinder actually vaporized, and these parts were smoking. So here's the part that was seized, and it's still pretty hot, but I can hold on to it. This part might be serviceable. Worst case scenario, I guess you could probably rebuild this, but I wasn't sure what I was going to find when I finally unseized this thing, so I went ahead and ordered some replacement parts to rebuild the master cylinder. And I'm not going to give any props to the company that I ordered these from, because it took them over 3 weeks to get these parts to me. They were supposed to be at my doorstep in about 4 days. When I ordered them, they said that they would be here on a Thursday, and it was like 2.5 to 3 weeks later before they showed up. So I'm not even gonna mention who I ordered this part from. So anyway, back on point, only 2 parts came out of this master cylinder when I applied heat to it, and it was this piston with the little O-ring. So that's one part all by itself, and then the second part was this spring with a little bushing, rubberized bushing thing. Again, if it really came down to it, I could probably unseize, polish this up a little bit with a buffing wheel or something, and I get all the grime off of here. Hindsight, maybe I would have done that first. It does feel a little gritty, and I can see that there's some, there's some brown, it almost looks like rust in there.
and it's not rust. I don't know what it is. It's probably grimy brake fluid. One of my YouTube buddies in T8 basically told me that I deserve this problem. I've had this bike for like 12 plus years, and I have never until recently done the brake fluid. I've never bled the brake lines. I've never, basically the reason I'm having this problem right now is that I've never bled the brake lines and done the preventative maintenance that I should have been doing at least once every 2 years. You want to bleed your brakes. Maybe you'll prevent this from happening. I never use my rear brakes, and that's why they seized up. And in fact, this bike has been parked for a couple of years. I'm just now trying to get it going again so that I can actually start using it before the end of the season, and maybe I'll sell it, maybe I'll trade it in for a dual sport or something. But I know for sure that if the rear brakes aren't working, I'm going to get screwed on the resale. So yeah, another reason I don't recommend Babbitt's babbittsonline.com is because I don't know if this was their fault or if this was UPS's fault, but this is what the box looked like when I finally got it weeks later. It looks like somebody sat on it. So thankfully you can sit on parts like this all you want and it's not going to do much to it, but this kind of adds a little insult to injury. Not only were the parts 2.5, 3 weeks late, when I finally got them, it looks like Bertha sat on the box. I also got an extra O-ring. It's just a simple O-ring. I think it's like a buck, maybe $2. And if you get a good parts diagram for your bike, you're going to find it's basically a rebuild kit, and it'll come with the spring, the piston, this little cup, dust boot, I think is what they call it, a dust boot, and then a new snap ring. Here's the new snap ring. So I'll get into the parts that you need, or the tools rather, that you need to do this job. One of the things that you definitely have to have, and you'll have to go to Home Depot or order it online, is a pair of good snap ring pliers to get that stupid snap ring off of your existing master cylinder, because that is a real pain in the ass to get off. Snap rings are cool when you don't have to screw with them. Here's the old one, just so you can see it a little bit better. So you get some snap ring pliers that basically clip into those two holes, and it allows you to spread them. Actually, in this case, you're going to compress it, and so you can pop it out of the master cylinder. The snap ring basically fits down in there and helps keep everything from popping out. So you're going to want to invest in some snap ring pliers. You get them at Home Depot for about 20 bucks for the good ones, and you might only use them 3 or 4 times in your entire life, but trust me, it's worth buying those pliers. Otherwise you'll be struggling with it for hours and cussing like I was until I went to Home Depot and actually got the right parts. So next up, we're going to reassemble. I think this part is cool now. It's actually still kind of hot. So what we're going to want to do is I'm going to let this part cool off a little bit more. It's still pretty hot to the touch. And you're going to want to run some fresh brake fluid through all of this, all these little holes. I've had this soaking in this pan for about a week and a half now. And there might be some contaminants in here and the grit, I don't know what you want to call it. There's going to be stuff in here that you don't want in your brake system. The recommendation is that if you ever clean out any part that has anything to do with your brake system, you do it with brake fluid. Brake fluid's cheap. It's cheap enough to where if you need to flush some parts with some brake fluid, buy a couple extra bottles. And so we're going to wash these parts out in brake fluid and let them soak in a fresh pan that doesn't have dead bugs and mothras and crap floating around in it. And once I'm comfortable that this is clean, then we'll go ahead and rebuild it with the new parts kit. So on closer inspection, and I can't really, well, maybe I can get a flashlight in here, but once you finally get the piston out of here and it's no longer seized, let's see if I can get that flashlight in there. There's some junk in there, just brown looking crud. It's not that clean. And this is your brake system. You want this to be, you don't want any crap in there. So I got a can of 3M brake cleaner. I'm gonna spray this out inside and try and get all of that out. And then the auto parts trip that I just went in, just finished, I got some .4 brake fluid, a big can. This is 32 ounce jug, so it's enough to do the bike, and if I'm lucky, I can do the truck and bleed the lines on that. It doesn't have any major problems, but I don't know. While I'm at it, I might as well work on it. And thankfully, when I took the blowtorch to this, I didn't melt it. I didn't damage it. I don't think I warped it at all. So this part is still perfectly good. So we're just going to rebuild it with the internals, reinstall it on the bike, and then we'll have brakes. All right, that should be good. We'll let that part dry. All right, so the first step in rebuilding this is they indicate that you want to apply brake fluid to the piston cup set, and that is these new parts. So I'm going to use this pan that I've cleaned out, and we're basically going to soak these parts in. There's a snap ring in here that doesn't need to be soaked, and the dust boot doesn't need to be soaked. But basically we're going to take the parts that we took out of this unit when we were rebuilding it and unseizing it, and we're going to soak those parts in brake fluid just to get them kind of lubed up so that hopefully they won't seize up again. So I gotta get a move on. So open up the parts bag here, and basically what I want to do is take the spring, the new piston, and the rest of these parts, the dust boot, not to be confused with DOS boot, this boot, the brand new snap ring, and this little rubber O-ring. It's not an O-ring, it's like a cup that goes on the new part. I'll demonstrate that shortly. But we're going to soak all those things in brake fluid for a little bit just to get them lubed up. Let those soak in there for a few minutes. Alright, so your rebuild kit is going to come with this tiny little boot thing here. It kind of looks like a suction cup, and that needs to go on the spring. Don't forget to do this, because if you do, you will end up having to take everything apart again after you've got it all together. So this goes on here. Basically like that. And if you have any questions about it, look at your old part. It basically just sits on there. And that's all there is to it. So make sure you put that on the end of your spring. Otherwise, you're going to be really pissed off when you reassemble this thing and you realize that you have extra parts. So now that you've got that piece on there, you just drop the spring in like that. Then you're going to take your new piston and cup, and it's going to go on top of that piece. And basically you just set it in there like that. Now, this is the part that sucks. There's no doubt about it. This part sucks. So you're going to take this push rod assembly and it goes onto this cup here, and you have to push it down and apply pressure to it, and then you're going to take your snap ring, drop it over the top. And this is where a good pair of snap ring pliers really come in handy, because quite frankly, this part is the crappiest part of the entire job. So you're going to take your snap ring pliers and get them into those holes and compress the snap ring. You got to do that while this washer is down there, and it's kind of hard to get a good camera perspective on this. But I guess my point is that don't be upset if this takes some time, because you're going to have to apply pressure to this whole piston assembly while you're doing this. Snap rings are awesome unless you have to actually work with them. Like so. Okay, so we got the snap ring in now. I'm going to test this. It works. Alright, so hard part is now done. So really the only part that you should have left at this point is the dust boot. And it's pretty simple. You want the flange, the fat end, to go in first. You slip it over. This just protects everything. And you want to be careful that you don't damage this part, but basically you just pop it in there. And I'm using an Allen wrench. I'm sure there's some specialty tools for this. Wouldn't be surprised at all. But just go around the perimeter and make sure that's seated. And obviously you don't want to pierce it. Alright. Rear master cylinder has been rebuilt. Now we can reinstall it on the bike.